Hello, everyone. I am very delighted to welcome, on behalf of our Dean and all of our school, Ilaria Valente, today in the School of Architecture, in this historical room of our hall of our school. This was a very much expected event and announced. Unfortunately, we have to face the tragic event that happened a few days ago in Greece with the deadly accident that has shaken all of us. And for this reason, the school is not working normally today, but still, we are still here to broadcast the event so that everybody can share and follow. Ilaria is a guest in our school, coming from the Polυτεχνείου di Milano, a very important center for architectural education in Italy and at European scale. She by herself has contributed for many decades in the dialogue about architecture, urban design, history, and contemporary challenges that we face in our cities through multiple positions that she served in the education of architecture. She is a professor of architectural design at the Polυτεχνείου. She has been the dean of the School of Architecture, Urban Planning and Construction for many years in Italy. Also, she is the Vice President of the European Association of Schools of Architecture, and she is currently the Deputy Rector for International Affairs at the university. But mostly, Ilaria is a very beloved person in the architectural community in Italy and worldwide. Everybody knows her and appreciates her, a fact that I had personally the opportunity to experience when I visited Milano some years ago, and I noticed how much her colleagues appreciate and respect her, and this is not only because of her undisputable academic merit, but also for her full dedication as a person that has worked very hard and is taking her roles as an educator, as a teacher, and as a thinker very seriously and with a full commitment. And for this reason, we are really very honored to have her here, and we are excited to hear about her talk that will be about the duration, the concept of duration in architecture, but also building on a recently completed research project, recycling theory. Ilaria, we are happy to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Thanos, for your kind words, and thank you to the School of Architecture of Athens for the invitation, to Rivalava, to all the colleagues that are here, and to the students. I'm very happy to be in Athens. First of all, I want to express my closeness to your mourning during those days for this tragic accident, train accident of the last days. About duration, I want to say that in my research and activity as professor, I think that nowadays we have to reconsider in deep some foundations, some terms, some notions, because we are in a period in which of great changes in the life. In our life in general, and in the life of the cities, and in the way of practicing architecture. I think that duration is a central notion. And I have also to say something about the fact that the Italian School of Architecture and the School of Milan worked a lot in the connection between architectural design theory and history, and architectural design and the relationship with the context is something that is part of our history. We think about some masters starting from Ernesto Nathan Rogers, then to Aldo Rossi, to Vittorio Gregotti, etc. And so we grow in this type of paradigm, and so thinking about duration is something that I consider important for the actual research. It seems strange to talk about duration and history in Greece, that is the cradle of this notion. And so in the discussion, I would like to start from the notion of time. What does it mean, time? Ion, Chronos, and Kairos. I apologize, I didn't study ancient Greek, and so I write in our alphabet. And so we know that time is something of very complex and articulated, and starting from these ancient notions, we consider the extended time of life, the chronological time, and the time of events. So there are different type of time, and the idea of duration is connected with those initial ideas of time. So duration is the essence of the time of life. We can say this is divided as between accumulation and dissipation, between the depth of momentary experience and the vast accumulation of experience. As Marcel Proust aptly expressed, in everybody's life, time and duration are mostly a matter of depth or density. So starting thinking about the significance of duration, we can say we can be connected with the thinking of Bergson and saying that duration is transition and memory. Memory is a notion that, for example, for Aldo Rossi and other architects become central in conceiving architecture. And so the latter is not a personal memory, but is inherent to change, a memory which prolongs the before into after and prevents us from falling into an eternal present. And this is, in my idea, is an important point, because now we live in a period in which sometimes we are under the impression to live in an eternal present, in which the past is consumed in a certain sense. And this happens also for architecture. And so this is Paul Ricoeur, who read with attention and interpreted the thinking of Bergson. Bergson outlines the nature of becoming, which is not only passage, but, as in the framework of memory, duration. And so we arrive to the idea of duration, a becoming that lasts. This is the main intuition, says Ricoeur, of matter and memory, which is one of the more important texts by by Bergson. But because we are architects, and architecture is an artistic and technical practice, we can also quote the idea of the time of the work of art as Cesare Brandi expressed, that is represented in 3 different moments. The duration is the expression of the work in the period in which is being formulated by the artist, the length of the period in which the artist composed the work of art. And then there is the interval. The interval is between the end of the creative process and the time when our consciousness actualizes a work of art in itself. So the time in which, as individuals or as society, we accept the work of art. And this is something that that constitutes an interval, and not just, I think, in the work of art, but also in science. There is a time of acceptance of a new idea, of an innovation. And then there is the third term of Brandi is the actual, as the moment in which we accept the form. So, in thinking about this topic, and I suggest to the students to read it, I consider a beautiful text that is a text of the end of the 50s, of the 59, if I well remember, that is by The Shape of Time by Kubler, that treat about the history of things from the point of view of the figure and form, so is also connected with the idea of the life of the forms. And in this history of things, Kubler says something of interesting, that is the diachronical way in which the shapes take form, the shapes of the things take form. Diachronical because there are some innovations that could enter, could be introduced, and other ideas that are continuously, that remain continuously. And so we have the possibility of have different, as can I say, tracks in which ideas around arts and architecture, in our case, could live together and be contaminated. So the sense of of the speech of today is to enter in the idea of duration, considering the discontinuity produced by modernity, in which the idea of duration enters in crisis. Because as Baudelaire says, it's the transitory, the fugitive, the contingent, the half of the art of which the other half is eternal and immutable. This is an idea, a sentence by Baudelaire that well describes the coupure of modernity about the idea of time and duration. And I try to summarize, the topic is complex, but just to introduce the topic, that we are dealing during the modernity with the idea of progress, and so of the idea of the irreversibility of processes. So this is one of the problems also that we face nowadays. And then, at the end of this speech, I will face the idea of reversibility. And so what does it mean thinking about life cycles? So how the idea of cycle enter in our ideas, in our tools, in our theoretical tools and practical tools. And so with other words that enter in our language as resilience, and because, and I think first of all, the idea of considering in another way our built environment as a resource in the sense of promote a sustainable development, and so enter not the idea of the duration, but maybe of the durability. And so in a certain sense, we could try to give a new sense to the idea of duration, to give new life to the idea of duration. So this is just, there are some images that comment the two scales, in a certain sense, of the term of duration referred to architecture and to architectural design, architectural and urban design and practice in general. So the idea of the stratification of our cities, this is an image of the plans of Lanciani of Rome. But anyway, just is enough to have a walk around Athens to better maybe understand what does it mean, stratification, and the complexity of the life of the city, of the physical life of the city. And this idea that I consider interesting for architectural design, the one by André Corbeau that wrote this essay, The Land as Palimpsest. Now there have been a beautiful exhibition in Mendrisio about the archive of André Corbeau that now is at the Accademia di Architettura, in which was collected all the papers, and André Corbeau was not an architect, but he worked on the shape of the city, and the idea of the possibility for architecture and urban design to work on the traces of the settlements that become the palimpsest for design. And then those are other images that are chosen to describe the stratification of the city, of different of the traces of different period of the history of the city. And and of our landscape that are artificial landscape modified by man, not just for build houses, but also for agriculture, so for producing for the agriculture. And other images of the landscape and also of the beautiful Italian landscape, and of another type of landscape that is superposed, that is the landscape of infrastructure. So other type of traces that cut our landscape, producing also voids, difficult voids, and difficult situation of marginality also. And then there is the other scale of the topic of duration, that is the one of the architecture, of the realization of the work itself. And this is just an emblematic image is the structure for building the cupola, the dome of Brunelleschi in Florence, and the section and the material and the bricks, how they are composed to give the solidity, the firmitas to the cupola of Brunelleschi. So duration is connected with the duration and superposition of the traces in our territories on one hand, and in the other hand about the duration of and the solidity of the buildings. Those are the two topics that I would like to treat. Then the idea could be extended to the duration of languages, and we could talk of other topics related to duration, but I think that we have no time to do that, and so I try to develop those two. So the duration is also connected with time, with consumption also of the buildings, and with some forms of decadence of the construction. So we know very well that in the history of architecture there is a lot of ideas about the topic of the ruins, ruins that are part of our territory. Ruins, but not just old ruins, but example given, this is a photograph took in Calabria, and this is part of an unlegal construction that remains in the territory, and the topic of the unachieved or abandoned illegal constructions is enormous. In Italy it is, but I think all over the world, also in some huge metropolis, could be something of very complicated. I've been recently in Cairo, in which there are an enormous extension of illegal buildings that constitute a big problem for the city. So, just to remember some theories related to history that are important, that have been important also for the studies around urban morphology and architectural typology made in Italy. First of all, the theory of the long duration by Fernand Braudel, that has to be quoted, absolutely. And this is, in a certain sense, go back to the original ideas of Ion, Kronos, and Kairos, when he said, when he treated about history, the topic of the individual time of the event, we have to know that history, until Fernand Braudel, was the history of the events, of the heroes. And Braudel is inaugurating, in a certain sense, the idea of looking at the material history of the civilization to better interpret the story of the civilization. So the story is done by the individual time of the event, the social time of cycles, and the geographical time, the immobile time of structure. So there are different speeds of time for Braudel. And the time of structure for Braudel is the long duration, so the geographical time, the time of structure that resists to the change. So also in Braudel, the idea is to put in connection duration and change as a dynamic. And this is the thing that could be interesting for us as architects if we think to the project as an act of transformation of the settlement. Other two positions that I consider interesting are the one of Pomian. Pomian is an epistemologist that wrote about the time of innovation as a time, as an irreversible time, which from being local, he says, ends up becoming global, while its nature changes gradually as it is embodied in new structures. So the topic of the time that is irreversible and then that become eternal present, in a certain sense, is the topic that Vittorio Gregotti faces when he spoke in architecture in the time of incessant of the topic of the consumption of architecture also by the transmission by the media, and of the continuous present as something that could in fact erase the fundamental idea of duration that is fundamental for architecture. So those are just to comment the topic of the traces, of the resistant traces, of the superposition of the settlements. Those are texts, images of the fabric of North African cities that are connected, that are founded by the Romans, and then with the superposition of the Muslims and Arab settlements. And on the other hand, in the Central Europe, the city founded by the Romans that then become smaller and larger during the centuries, and with the superposition of the traces. And some images of the studies by Saverio Muratori on the shape of Venice, of the medieval Venice. And this is the fundamental in Italy of the theory of the evolution, if I can say, in the idea of Muratori, of the architectural typology as the legacy of the spontaneous conscience, as he says, and the way in which a fabric, in the idea of Muratori, is formed by addition and improvement of the shape of the typology. These studies are important to define the shape of the Gothic plot, and are very important because our studies of the end of the 50s. And so there are studies against an idea of functionalist planning. This is the real value of these studies. So the idea of reconsider the story of the city as a material for architectural design and for planning that in those years was based on zoning. So those are work that Muratori did with their students in the School of Venice. The surveys and the drawings have been done by the students of the course by Saverio Muratori. And those are the photographs of the survey and pages of the book that collect the studies, whose name is the Operante Storia, per un'operante storia urbana di Venezia. So there is a tradition in Italy. This is part of a book, if I well remember, of Antonio Monestiroli, in which is defined the shape of the Gothic plot and of the court as a matrix for the shape of the center of the Italian cities, but not just of the Italian cities. And other studies by Gianfranco Caniggia, who was a pupil of Saverio Muratori, about Florence and other cities around typology. And then this is, on the other hand, a study that I did with my research team around about the discontinuity, in the sense that the studies of Muratori and also the one of Carlo Emonino and others had at the base an idea of continuity of in the formation of the shape of the city, in the relationship between the street and the building types. But the contemporary peripheries had broken this type of continuity. This is something that Carlo Emonino said in a very clear way, that there is a difference in the foundation of this relationship. And these maps are done on Milan and try to make a classification about the different type of fragilities of the fabrics, where the fabrics become marginal and become fragile in the sense that in some parts have been abandoned or can be substituted or regenerated, as we can say. So it's an important extension that affects not just the periphery, but also some central areas. So it's something that is a phenomenon that it's enough sprawled in our cities. And in the same direction, some studies by Stefano Boeri and Arturo Lanzani, those are studies of about 20 years ago, maybe more, about the suburbia of Milan, the sprawling of Milan. And in those studies, Boeri and Lanzani tried to give a name to this type of fabrics, to find a classification of those shapes that are changing the shape of the contemporary cities. So then this first part was related more to give some ideas about the relationship between the building and the city, the building and the context, and the shape of the built environment. But now I would like to face the topic of construction and duration. So we can say that the idea of duration, first of all, is connected with the idea of firmitas, the Vitruvian idea of firmitas, and indirectly with the notion of utilitas. Why indirectly? Because utilitas is essential for establishing the relationship between the shape and the life of the building, because utilitas is the use, and so it's related to the life. So they are strictly connected in the idea of duration. So in his introduction to the second book of the Re Edificatoria, which is dedicated to the materials, Leon Battista Alberti discusses the indispensable and harmonious relationship between architecture and the laws of nature. The concept of solidity, firmitas, a mainstay of the Vitruvian triad, is closely connected with the issue of duration. Indeed, for Alberti, any construction should not go against the forces of nature, not exceed the builder's abilities, or be at odds with the rules of decorum and convenience, but above all should not lack the ability to last for a long time. So it's something that in the theory of architecture, the idea of duration becomes fundamental. And then Andrea Palladio, and this is important, emphasized the role of duration, replacing the term solidity with the term perpetuity. This is something of important in the idea of architecture, in the Western idea of architecture connected with duration. We want to build something that becomes eternal. So, something that now is, in fact, in discussion, because now we are thinking about the end of life of a building, in the moment in which we conceive it. And it's for that I consider that thinking in deep about the topic of duration is something of important, because we are in a situation of a changing of a paradigm, of an important paradigm for us. Palladio wrote, as Vitruvius says, in all construction, three things must be considered without which no building shall deserve praise. These are usefulness or convenience, that is the other concept that is connected, perpetuity, and beauty. So it's a different way to put the concept of the triad. Other treatises, subsequent treatises, will indicate firmitas with terms such as perpetuity, strength, construction quality. So this become very, very, very strong. But then, the modernity. Modernity and duration. Sorry, it's written durability, but it's wrong, it's duration. So the question is, and it's a question done by Marc-Antoine Loger. Are the moderns able to build buildings that could last? Because in the books, in the book of Loger, This is the question. And the question is also explained in an interesting way, thinking to the modern way of thinking architecture, modern, when we consider modern, of the modern movement, about the problem of lightness, or to be heavy, or light, to the mass and to the lightness. Maybe Loger is the first author that speak about that. And so it starts also to speak about the appearance of solidity. This is another topic that is connected with the idea that we spoke before about that eternity or perpetuity is important for architecture. So the architecture have to demonstrate in its language, also in the choice of the materials, the idea of perpetuity. So there is an image of perpetuity. And so Loger introduced the principle that the walls should not give into the heavy and messy. And he suggested that the excess of the lightness would be preferable to those enormous masses that are often found in our modern edifice, modern for his time, and which are without doubt therein a very unnecessary. The great secret, the true perfection of the art, consists in joining solidity to delicacy. So he introduced the idea of lightness. This is something that also then we will see appears in Viollet-le-Duc. But about the idea of lightness and mass in architectural research, I choose some projects and ideas of some architects, starting from the post-war architecture, also to talk about different paths that are parallel on this topic, which could be the appearance of solidity, with which kind of materials and ideas. So I start from Fernando Távora. This is Távora did some studies that are enough interesting around Portugal at the end of the 40s and first half of the 50s that are similar in a certain sense to the one of Saverio Muratori, the same period in which also vernacular architecture has been studied. And some projects of Távora demonstrate an idea of use massive materials. So after the modern movement, after the war, the idea of thinking another time to the walls. And then, because I'm here, I thought to quote Piccionis, the forest village of Piccionis, that has beautiful drawings of architecture done by stone and walls. and also that are connected to nature in an interesting way, I think, to the topography of the ground. And so this massive idea of the architecture that come back, and with the idea of using also traditional materials. And then on the other hand, another massive idea of architecture that is the one of Mendes da Rocha with the Casa Butana, so the concrete that is connected with the use then of the glass, and with a particularly relationship with the ground, because it's the mass that is under the ground, as we can see by these images that are powerful. Is an idea of strengthness of the architecture. And on the other hand, a more recent project, this one of a house by Lacaton et Vassal, that is all done with steel and this kind and glass, and that gives us another idea of solidity, more recent. And the use of a wood that is a material that by Tomoaki Uno in this house, the idea of the wood that is material that could be substituted in the culture of construction of Japan. So different idea of the mass, of the lightness, and of the use of material in more recent architecture, starting from the idea of Loger, with a big jump, but I think that we are talking about ideas, and that could be interesting for us. Talking about this idea of lightness and of the symbols of duration. There is an emblematic of duration, as I said before. And the first that write this in a clear way was Viollet-le-Duc, who wrote that it's necessary of giving the built thing the appearance of duration. The appearance of duration, that's important. So not just has to be solid, but has to have the appearance of duration. And about that, some architects and also theoreticians of the architecture, as Rafael Moneo, talk about the topic of the necessity of express consistency and the consistency between built form and image. And for example, Vittorio Gregotti, who talk about the connection between an idea of duration and the idea of rigor, and this is translated also in the language of architecture. This is something that in the idea of Gregotti is related to the defense against the oscillation of the fashions, so against the eternal present, in a certain sense, of the consumption of architecture in the fashions, and of the connection with the site that Gregotti considered as an important element also for expressing duration. Because as we say before, a context is something that is done during the time by stratification. Every context is historical, also the one that we consider the wasteland. And so Gregotti wrote, one must make the things of architecture appear as if they had always been there, inevitable actors of a place. And other authors, as Vittorio Magnargo Lampugnani in an essay about modernity, Modernity and Duration is the title of the book, point out the tension on the topics of the necessity of thinking to the maintenance, to the conservation, to the modification, to the reuse of our built environment, of our heritage, if we want to use an extended notion of heritage. And so this is something that is versus the replacement, so the demolition, the replacement, and the consumption of architecture. And this then become a way of also of defining the language of architecture for example, this set of architects, as Monet, as Gregotti, and other. An idea of parsimony, in a certain sense, of to use less, to reduce the use of the redundance of the shape of architecture, to have a sobriety of form, and this is for resisting to the consumption of time. So this is just an image of the book by Viollet-le-Duc. And then I choose the Murcia City Hall by Rafael Moneo to explain this type of approach, because this, I think, is a good exemplum from this point of view. Sorry. Also looking at the way of organizing the facade in relationship with the shape of the square and with the other buildings that are involved. And another project that deal with our ancient fabric by Gonzalo Birne, a beautiful small public building that interpretate is in Trancoso, which is a small town in Portugal, that is another corner. Also the one of Moneo is a corner. This one is another small corner, is smaller. But in my idea is significant of this type of approach in which we want to be, in a certain sense, modest from the point of view of the language to better express the idea of duration and of solidity. But now I would like to start to face a topic that is important for our contemporaneity, that is the idea of disposable architecture. So something that we, as the bottle that we can recycle in a certain sense. And it's the idea of thinking architecture by the components of the construction. Because the idea of life cycle and of recycled materials is based on each component of the building. And so the architecture arrived to other type of composition that we have, that is possible to think. So having a look to the scale of the house, because I've chosen this one, trying to develop this lecture. This is a house by Glenn Marcotte, and in my idea is interesting because of the way of producing this architecture by components, as we can say. So this introduced to a topic that is the one of the sustainable building that today is dominated by the solution of the dialectic between production and consumption, and prefigures a possible order based on prediction, that is on the identification of a planned duration. So it's not the eternity, the perpetuity, but it's a planned duration. So it's a new idea, it's something that is connected to life cycle. Consequently, the project makes the construction process explicit. So the idea of the project as a process become very, very important. Both at, I think, at the level of the building construction, but also of urban planning. We are more and more talking about the process of realization of the settlements also. So the project makes the construction process explicit, from the production of materials and components to the making of the building itself and its management, to the set of action required for the extension of its life cycle in terms of maintenance, reuse, restoration, preservation, and finally is the commissioning, because we are talking about that, and the recycling of all its constituent parts and materials. This is the perspective in which we are working nowadays. And such attitude enacts an evident discontinuity with the notion of duration that has traditionally permeated architecture. So the topic of the life and of the end of life, we are in front of a powerful metaphor as other in the history of architecture. Here, there are a lot of consideration that we can do about the topic of duration, permanence, and continuation as terms for design in general, for architectural and urban design. And on the other hand, consideration about the relationship between heritage making. What does it mean in our cities? Build the heritage. We can think about, and we can open a huge parenthesis about UNESCO initiatives, for example, of preservation of cities and the heritage in general. On one hand, so a strict preservation of our environment. And on the other hand, the continuous alteration that is well represented, for example, of the way of work of building cities in China. But this is also connected with an idea of time that is different from the point of view of the idea of duration. Because in this direction there are some studies by François Julien, who is a sinologue, very, very interesting about time, who said that in China eternity is capable of revealing the combined aspect of unending succession and alteration. Motion on the one hand, eternity on the other. These are the two pillars of the idea of time in China, or rather are the two arcs-boutants which complemented each other, one physical and the other metaphysical. So this idea of alteration that then is continuously applied in the China cities. The China cities, when they demolish very rapidly neighbors and they rebuild with new buildings. Now, since some years, they are rethinking about how to preserve a part of their heritage, but there is a massive substitution of the fabric of their cities, and so this is a form of continuous alteration that belongs to an idea of time that is very far from our. So we are at the end, a few minutes. So those are some ideas about the topic of recycle. Recycle and reuse practices that are part of the actual accelerated dynamic. Those are some terms that we are dealing with as duration and durability. Those are two different terms. Durability is more connected with the idea of sustainability. If we think that in French is développement durable. Sustainability is développement durable. So an idea of is well expressed in this way of define sustainability. The idea of recycle, so to think about new life cycles for buildings, but also for open space, for infrastructure, so also for the settlements. So at different scale, we go back to the idea of duration at different scales. The idea that the life cycle allows us to measure also the inertia, the resistance, and or the adherence of change in the different situations. And then there are some studies that I consider interesting at the level of urban design by Paola Vigano about the topic of upcycle, hypercycle, subcycle. She wrote important essays about that, talking also about the topic of the embodied energies in the shape of the city. And so the idea of consider the city and the territory as a renewable resources. So as resources in our design process. And so here, some images of our contemporary landscape. This is a conservatory, and other photographs that are beautiful photographs. So I show you about the production of recycling, because it's a new form of production, the one of recycle. So of bottles, of other materials, of metals, and the images of the industry of recycle. And then some images of some projects. Those are the one, our choice of the one that have been shown in Rome in an exhibition at the Maxi some years ago. About some projects of reuse, also of different type of infrastructure, of building, and so on. This one is a museum in a tunnel by Elisabetta Terragni. This is 2009. This is very well known as the High Line in New York, and this is also interesting from the point of view of the participation of the inhabitants of all the process of realization of this important work. And other that are very well known as the Palais de Tokyo by Lacaton et Vassal. And then some other terms that are under discussion nowadays. That is the term of regeneration. We have also to think that are all new organic metaphors, because we are talking about life cycle, we are talking about regeneration. So these type of terms that are connected with life sciences. And so there are a lot of choice that we have to do when we design. To give value to the resources, so to analyze or to consider in deep the values of things that we want to reuse or modify, or to abandon or to demolish. Those are important choices to be done. And what does it mean to intervene in the heritage, what we have to preserve, to conserve, or to modify. The term reinventation. So there is also a new way of apply creativity around the project. And then other terms that cleaning up, purifying, emptying, repairing, and so on. And those are buildings that are that can demonstrate this new way of thinking, the recycling of architecture and of our landscape. Using, for example, the debris of other works on the territory, or reusing important and structure as the bunker in Saint-Nazaire, something that cannot be demolished because they are so powerful and so resistant and maybe eternal in this sense. and then how to recycle materials that are not originally materials connected to the architecture. This is the shop by Freitag in Zurich, that is done by container, used container, and reused infrastructure as dwellings. And then I finished from my part and from Louis Kahn. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I would like to ask whether this correlation of modernity, of modern architecture, with the time period, is just a constructional reference or an architectural aesthetic reference, or is it a general, cultural, and even political condition of change during the end of 18th and 19th century? Is it this? Because I believe that what came in the architectural way of composing things has to refer with a general deformation, deconstruction. I may even use the word deconstruction of the promise of enlightenment, of the development of the Charles Darwin evolutionary theory, of the political changes in the political theory by Hegel, a bourgeois philosopher, and by Marx, a left philosopher, and the feeling that we could not believe in the cultural and political stability in general. And in this condition, I believe that modernity, not modern architecture, modernity in general, has to reject stability. And what we see in architecture, and probably in painting, is just the metaphor of this total ethical deformation being introduced in architecture. And where the stones of Venice had to collapse, physically collapse. But in the same time, it was the sovereignty of Venice, the political sovereignty of Venice that had collapsed. Well, this is my opinion about what happened with time and modernity in general, time and neoteric period in general. Well.
Yes, I've not treated in deep the coupure of modernity, because that needs an entire lecture, I think, to be done. But I agree with you that that there is in the foundation of modernity there is the creative destruction of that was part of the thought of Nietzsche. Now, so the idea of completely change the perspective on one hand of and the rejection of the idea of duration and the rejection of the idea of history. So this is, in a certain sense, is something that I give as an acquisition in our talk. I think that then there is some ideas that could be discussed in continuity. For example, about the topic of the lightness and the resistance of materials, and so on, the research about new materials that could give another idea of solidity, and maybe also of economy, for sure, because also of the different organization of the work of the building, and this is something that is important. If we think also to some experiments as the one of Le Corbusier à Pessac about the way of building new neighborhoods and about the prefabrication and about the economy. And this is something that maybe could be important to go in deep about this aspect connected with the idea of duration. So thinking to what is disruptive in the idea of modern movement and what is in continuity in the sense of thinking to new way of thinking of the problem of the good construction, if I can say in this. I don't know if I answered to you.
Okay, I would like to thank you, Ilaria, for my first reaction is to say that this has been really the talk of an architect in all senses of the word, in what architecture can really learn us in how to see the world and to link buildings and cities with what is going on, and how to make very strong comments about our culture, about our civilization, I would say. So I appreciated a lot of things in the lecture. One thing is how let's say, the legacy of this way of thinking that comes from your universities about typologies and morphology can really evolve and continue to be updated about current challenges in a world that is changing so fast, and really you wonder how form and typology can become a way of understanding the world. And I was very fascinated to see how this tradition, this legacy of thinking has evolved in your teaching and in your work in things that are very contemporary. And I also appreciated this dual focus on the city on the one hand and the building on the other hand, and the relation between them in various forms. And I am convinced that the framework of duration that you propose in this very simple term that we have in our minds is really can expand so much in covering so many different things. And I think it has been a wonderful class of architecture in linking theory with references, and we really appreciate that. So I have more of a comment than a question, but just offering this maybe as a discussion topic.
I would also like to thank you so much for your lecture and make a quick remark. This is something you said which was just a little bit mentioned, but I consider as very important. You know, you had in your last slides, in your last listings, talking about the necessity and the importance to protect and to conserve, the importance of the equal necessity to throw away what suffocates heritage. This is a position that's really necessary these days, because we live in a culture now where everything is forced to stay alive. You know, all the info, tomorrow we will have your lecture recorded. I mean, we feel like we have to conserve and preserve everything. So a systematic, a really scientific, way to approach what has to go is a very challenging way to go down and investigate and research. I must say that for our studies as well.
Thank you, Eva. I think about this topic. We have a lot to work together, our colleagues that teaches and research in the domain of restoration. Because there are some thresholds that we have to face together. Because they have a great competence concerning the conservation. This is in Italy, for example. And because it's difficult nowadays to, for example, we have to face all the heritage of the 20th century. That is a great part of our fabrics. That is not just the Greek architecture, but also current fabrics that, in a certain sense, are in danger now. Because if you make bad interventions related to a fake idea of sustainability, you can do enormous damages. Exactly. And so I think that we have to work together to find the right balancing between some goals that are necessary for preserving energy and so on, that we have to deal with these topics on one hand, and then preserve the quality of architecture, the quality of the fabric is really the challenge now in Europe. Because our environment is done by the fabrics that are the legacy of the past. So this, I think, that is a ground of interdisciplinary work that we have to improve together with them, together with also with the structural design, because this enter in this type of problems. All the topics that are related to the seismic intervention in countries as Greece, as Italy, as other, are important from the point of view of the quality of the fabric that we want to give as legacy to our sons. So this to our children. So.
Yes. If there are no other comments, we would like to thank Ilaria very much for this very interesting talk, and to hope that it will be appreciated. We are regretting that the students are not here, but they will definitely have the chance to watch it and to think about it, and we will all certainly will think about it. Thank you very much, Ilaria.
Thank you to you all.